It's that time of the month. Welcome to my October reading wrap-up. I read a total of 6 books plus 1 DNF. As always, I will throw up some stats so you guys can see kind of what I was reading during the month. Overall, I feel like the month was really good for me. Starting off with the first book that I read and finished was The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This book finally made it off of my TBR. It's been on there for a while. This is the 3rd Kristen Hanna book that I read, and I ended up rating it 5 stars. I thought it was phenomenal. I will say though, I think this is my 2nd favorite Kristen Hanna book because I think The Great Alone is still so special to me, has a special place in my heart, and will probably always be number 1. I just have some sort of connection to that book. But jumping back to The Nightingale, this book is about 2 sisters, Isabel and Vianne. This is a World War II historical fiction book, so it's definitely more of a character study. It's going through the lives of these 2 sisters. This book kind of starts out before the 1940s in Paris, so it's really right before the war really is in a full-fledged swing. And I actually really liked that time frame because sometimes I feel like we start off a lot of World War II books when we already have concentration camps, we already have huge conflict. This one starts a bit before that, and the overall book takes place through 5 years. It is a chunky book, probably about over 500 pages, but even though it was 500 pages and it takes place over 5 years, the pacing, in my opinion, was still so good. It does not feel like you're reading a book this big. Honestly, it took me maybe 3-4 days to read it all because it was just that good. The writing itself, Kristen Hanna is such a great author that she makes the writing just flow so easily. You get engaged, you get connected to these characters. More on the characters, Isabel and Vianne, they are 2 completely different types of sisters. They could not be more different, honestly. It's kind of very interesting seeing the dichotomy of these 2 sisters, them seeing their lives completely differently. At times they do live together and you see the stark differences and the tensions that grow because of their differences, but you come to admire both of them for completely different reasons, and I honestly can't pick a favorite. I loved both of them because I think what they both do is completely admirable, completely courageous, very brave, and they just did what they had to do in order to survive. At the end of the day, this book is about survival, it's about love, it's about courage, it's about womanhood, and I think Kristen Hanna does an amazing job of writing a fiction book but still being educated enough to throw in real stories and real tidbits from women during this time frame. I think she mentions in this book that in this time frame, I feel like a lot of these stories are men focused, men centered, and this sheds an important light on women's stories and their role in this war. Overall, tension is so good. You're just waiting for the other shoe to drop the entire time, and when it does, you're gonna be floored. So not only is it an emotional read, but it was extremely powerful for women's stories and their voices. So 5 stars all around. Amazing book. I will say I have a little bit of a book recommendation. If you have read this book and you loved it, I definitely recommend The Book of Lost Names by Kristen Harmel. This is also World War II historical fiction, but it has a romance subplot, and this was a 5-star read for me as well, and it is quite a bit shorter than this one, so just a book recommendation if you're interested. Next book that I read and finished was The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I will say I mostly read this book via audiobook, but I do have the physical copy because I was able to get it from my library. And honestly, having a physical copy really did help a lot because there are multiple points of views. This book takes place during summer camp, well, towards the end of summer camp. One of the little kids at the camp goes missing. She is a teenager named Barbara, and that kind of takes place in the first chapter of the book, and the rest of the book is the story of what happened to her and kind of unfolding some mystery and secrets from her family and her siblings. Now, this book is a mystery thriller, and I feel like I mentioned this in one of the reading vlogs that I did, that I would say this is more of a mystery, very heavy on the mystery. There's suspense, there's tension. I wouldn't say there's a really thrilling aspects about it. I wasn't on the edge of my seat the entire time or really at all. I was just more concerned about what happened. I will say it did feel a little long. It is pretty long for a thriller mystery, and for those reasons, I feel like if it was 150 pages shorter, it would have been better. I ended up rating this 3.5 stars. From the middle to like the last 70%, I honestly just wanted it to wrap up. I was getting kind of impatient, which I don't know if that's the book or if that's just me and my reading tastes. I will say the ending was worth it. I was getting so impatient, I was gonna rate this 3 stars max, but the ending was actually really good. I do think it was worth it. It did pay off really well. I feel like the entire time you're being teased a story and you think you have it figured out and then you don't. More on the POV POVs, you get multiple. So there's the mother, there's a police investigator, there's a camp counselor. So multiple POVs, and it can be hard to track names. So I do recommend reading it physically, but overall 3.5 stars. Next book that I read was Billy Summers by Stephen King. This was my first Stephen King book ever. I ended up rating this 3.5 stars, and I'm not gonna lie, I mostly read this book because of the hype, and I was just very curious, one, to read a Stephen King book, and two, to just see what this book was actually about. So this is about Billy Summers. He is a hitman for hire, and he gets hired for the big job, like his biggest job, and he plans to retire after it. I feel like that synopsis takes up not too much of the overall book, which I was kind of surprised about. Some things got resolved pretty quickly, and then the rest of the plot, I just did not expect it to go in the direction that it did, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. For me, I was just kind of not confused, but more so taken aback and surprised. It was enjoyable, but I wasn't fully invested. I wasn't super intrigued. I will say it was interesting, and it made for an interesting book overall, and I did like the ending. I feel like the last few lines of the book really kind of made me sit back and reflect on the entire book, and that probably boosted my rating a little bit. Overall, I was not obsessed with it. I would still recommend it, but I think I'm gonna try to pivot to maybe one of Stephen King's like horror books, which is something he's obviously super known for. This is a mystery thriller, but I would say it's also more of a general fiction book. Again, it wasn't super thrilling in my opinion. It was more suspenseful than anything, and then you kind of just go off the rails a little bit and you don't know the direction that this book is going to take you on. If you dig morally gray / imperfect characters, then definitely pick up this book because you'll probably enjoy Billy Summers. And I will mention there's a very interesting kind of plot device in this book where it's the main character is writing a book, so it's like a book within a book, which definitely helps to understand the main character of Billy Summers a lot better. You understand his motivations and kind of what drives him to do what he does. So that was very interesting, and I did like that aspect. So overall, 3.5 would recommend. Moving on to the fourth book that I finished in October, it was Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This is a fantasy book with a romance subplot. This is about Prince Kai and Peyton. Prince Kai is an elite. I'm gonna try to explain this fantasy plot clearly because fantasy can get a little bit confusing. So there's Prince Kai and Peyton. Prince Kai is an elite. The elites have powers, and Peyton is ordinary. She does not have powers, and there's kind of like these two rival classes in this world. Obviously, they're not supposed to be together because the elites are actually trying to get rid of all the ordinaries because they believe that the ordinaries are diminishing the elites' powers. But Peyton actually inevitably ends up saving Prince Kai's life, and that earns her a spot in these trials, which I'm gonna kind of segue into this book being very, very similar to the Hunger Games. Those are the types of trials we're talking about. Very, very eerily similar to the Hunger Games. I feel like I would have enjoyed it even more and loved it even more if there were stark differences. I feel like it was just too similar in terms of the tributes, the actual games themselves, our main character, our female main character's weapon of choice, love triangle. Like there's just too many things that I feel like were similar, whereas it could have been different. Regardless, I had a great time reading this book. I rated it 4 stars. It was a great adventure. I had fun. I bought into the romance. I loved the tensions. I loved the games overall, and it was just an adventure. I keep saying that because that's what I take away from this book was I had a fun time. There are a couple of jaw-dropping moments which I did not expect, but I definitely loved. It's dual POV, so you get both of their feelings, their emotions between Kai and Peyton, which is always a great thing to have in a romance book because you can really kind of see what our two characters are thinking and feeling. The ending was the perfect little cliffhanger, and I will definitely be picking up the second book in this series because it is a series. Overall, too, a solid debut for this author. I think it was great. Next up is another book by the same exact title, Powerless, but this one is by Elsie Silver. This is book 3 in the Chestnut Spring series, and overall, my favorite thus far. This was 5 stars for me. This is about Sloane and Jasper. It is a romance. It's childhood best friends to lovers, which is like my bread and butter. That is my favorite romance trope. I feel like I can really connect and sympathize and empathize with these characters because of their past. You really kind of just start off in the thick of it, so that I really enjoyed. The night I picked this up, I read over 100 pages because you really just pick up in a place that is so easy to follow, so easy to get hooked into. The writing was very beautiful and heartfelt. I did annotate because there's something about Elsie Silver's writing and just the romance and like literally the romance that I just wanted to tab and remember. Now, our main character Jasper is such a tortured soul. There's something so special about when someone is going through a hard time, has lived through a hard time, finds their partner, even a friend. They're literally the epitome of, you want this person to stay in your entire life, so you keep them as a friend versus like a relationship, because a relationship can end, but a friendship is forever. And that's, oh, I love that. Just seeing Jasper kind of grow by himself and with Sloane made this book very special. It was convincing. There was some funny banter, which probably was one of my top favorite parts of this book overall. Okay, now we're on to the last book that I read that I actually finished this morning. It is The Storied Life of AJ Fikry, and wouldn't you believe it, I rated this 5 stars. This is by Gabrielle Zevin, who's the author of Tomorrow, 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 and I've had that book on my TBR, my physical TBR, for over a year now, and I just have never read it because I don't know why. There's something intimidating about it, but after reading this book, I definitely want to pick up Tomorrow, Tomorrow, Tomorrow next because I fell in love with Gabrielle Zevin's writing. Storied Life of AJ Fikry is about a grumpy old bookstore owner who unfortunately loses his like prized possession, which is a collection of poems by Edgar Allan Poe, which are really, really expensive. Like he could sell them and make a lot of money off of them, but he loses them. And so he's already kind of gone through a lot of things in his life that make him this grumpy old man. Overall, this book was so beautiful. There was something about Gabrielle Zevin's writing that just made it magical and almost nostalgic, almost like I felt like I've read this before. It just brought upon some feelings in me that I haven't felt in a very long time in reading a book like this, honestly. It's probably also because this is a book about book for book lovers, and something about that type of book makes me love a book even more. AJ Fikry himself, he is so blunt, is like super straightforward, and has this very sort of dark humor, which I just inevitably fell in love with him. It was just refreshingly raw. This entire book is pretty character driven, and the side characters, I love them just as much. There is such a sense of community in this book, and that is just so strong, and it makes you just want to live and literally dive into this little world. It really seems like this is a book about the mundane life of this guy named AJ Fikry, but it is so much more, and that's when Gabrielle Zevin's talent is really showcased, because you just kind of get so attached to the characters. And I'm gonna be honest, it was super intriguing from like the first 2 pages too. I did not expect that. When I picked this up, I thought I might be in a little bit of a book slump, but this proved me wrong, or maybe it's just Gabrielle Zevin's writing, but it was so good that I got so attached when you would think it would be otherwise not super interesting of a story. This book is just proof that when something bad happens in your life, it can be a blessing in disguise. I did have a quote from this book that I screenshotted earlier today that I'm gonna read you. Now, obviously, like I mentioned, it's about books. So it says, why is any one book different from any other book? They are different. AJ decides because they are. We have to look inside many. We have to believe. We agree to be disappointed sometimes so that we can be exhilarated every now and again, which is so true as a reader. Sometimes you love books and you want that feeling, but you have to go through a few 3-star reads to get to your 5-star read. So anyway, I did not expect this book to honestly hit me like it did, to impact me, and for me to fall in love with it, but I definitely recommend. It's not very long and it's worth reading. I will also say another little book rec, because this book reminded me of The Reading List, which I read about a year or 2 ago, and it just gave me the similar vibes with the type of character that AJ Fikry is, and being a book about books for readers, it has those 2 similarities. So if you enjoyed this book, then you would probably like that one. And now briefly, I'm going to talk about the one DNF that I had this month. It was Wayward by Amelia Hart. This book has 3 timelines, 3 different women's stories. One of them is in 2019, one of them is in the 1940s, and one of them is in the 1600s. This book is a fantasy with some magical realism and some witches type of stuff, so it sounds very interesting, and I was semi-interested in. I got up to 50% of this book, and I just didn't see myself wanting to continue to read it, so I unfortunately DNF'd it. I feel like I just wasn't obsessed with any of the stories. I did enjoy it, but I didn't want, like, I reflected when I was 50% of the way through, and I was like, I just do not want to read the last 50%. And I've been telling myself that DNFing is okay, and I'm going to tell you that DNFing is okay. So we put this down. Maybe it's a DNF for now, maybe it's a DNF forever. I'm not too sure, but I did want to mention it in case, because it was on my October TBR, but unfortunately I did not finish that book. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.